collapse. Russia, once riding high on oil wealth and oligarch fortunes, is now spiraling into a financial abyss. And the most shocking twist? The very ally Putin counted on, China, is now quietly turning its back. Chinese banks are shutting off the money flow, leaving Moscow scrambling to stay afloat. Could this be the final nail in the coffin for Putin's war machine? For over 2 decades, Putin presented Russia as a fortress of stability, a nation where the oligarchs flaunted unimaginable wealth and energy sales pumped billions into state coffers. But today, that illusion is crumbling. Russia's economy is bleeding out, and no amount of propaganda can cover it up. Food shortages are intensifying, shelves are thinning, families are breaking apart under the crushing weight of unemployment, falling wages, and soaring prices. Billions of rubles are vanishing into the black hole of the war effort, while ordinary Russians quietly protest inside their own homes. But it isn't just money running out, it's people. The war is devouring Russia's youth, while millions flee abroad to escape conscription or economic despair. Factories lack workers. The Russian Ministry of Labor itself admits the country will face a shortfall of nearly 11 million workers by 2030. To fill the gaps, Moscow is dragging in migrant labor, but it isn't nearly enough. And while the labor force vanishes, Putin clings to his last card, oil and gas. But here lies the disaster. Oil is no longer a golden ticket. Russia's refineries are being bombed, 13.5% are already offline, reserves are dwindling, and the world is turning away. The so-called energy superpower is becoming powerless. This brings us to the most dramatic betrayal of all. For years, Russia leaned on China as its economic lifeline, convinced that Beijing would never let Moscow fall. But reality tells a darker story. Chinese banks, fearing Western sanctions, are cutting off financial channels to Russia. Deals are delayed, transactions canceled, and entire flows of money shut down. Even small regional banks in China are refusing to process Russian business. The Kremlin thought Asia would replace the West, but the opposite is happening. Payments are now forced through messy intermediary accounts, split transactions, and backdoor schemes. Every step takes longer, costs more, and attracts unwanted scrutiny. The financial lifeline is fraying, and Putin knows it. Imagine the humiliation, the Great Russian partnership without limits with China reduced to patchwork money tricks. This isn't just inconvenient, it's lethal to Russia's economy. Inside the Kremlin, the numbers no longer add up. Defense spending is skyrocketing while revenues from oil and gas collapse under sanctions and discounts. The government is burning through reserves at breakneck speed, and deficit targets are already shattered halfway through the year. Every ruble poured into tanks and missiles means less for hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. Interest rates remain painfully high, choking investment while domestic demand shrinks. Businesses hesitate, consumers retreat, and growth projections sink lower with every passing month. Russia is trapped in what economists call a narrow corridor. Every decision, whether raising taxes, printing money, or slashing budgets, creates even greater pain. And with Chinese banks pulling out, the corridor is closing in fast. But Moscow's problems aren't only financial. Ukraine is exploiting Russia's weakness with devastating precision. Take the Novokubansk oil refinery, one of Russia's largest. Ukraine struck it with 17 drones, wiping out over 4% of Russia's refining capacity in a single night. Even worse, this was the second strike on the same facility in just 3 weeks. This isn't random, this is strategy. By repeatedly targeting oil infrastructure more than 1,000 kilometers inside Russian territory, Ukraine is sending a chilling message. Nothing in Western Russia is safe. Every refinery, every industrial plant, every energy hub now sits under a shadow of destruction. For Beijing, this is a nightmare scenario. Why funnel billions into propping up Russia if Ukraine can destroy the equivalent value in infrastructure overnight? Supporting Putin would mean throwing money into a fire, and China knows it. Meanwhile, Russia's wealthy elite, the same oligarchs who once toasted champagne in luxury yachts, are panicking. Their protected bubble has burst. Suspicious deaths, mysterious disappearances, and forced nationalizations are tearing through the elite. Billionaires watch as their companies are seized, their assets stripped, and their futures erased. One of Russia's biggest gold producers, Zoloto, was snatched by the state in a swift court ruling. Airports, logistics hubs, and even farms are being nationalized under vague war economy laws. This sends a terrifying signal. Property is no longer safe. In Russia today, not even billionaires are beyond the Kremlin's reach. For investors, this means one thing: get out. Capital is fleeing, projects are frozen, and long-term planning is impossible. The result? Economic stagnation sets in, with no sign of recovery. And as if things weren't bad enough, Europe isn't easing the pressure. Instead, sanctions are expanding to target Russia's last escape routes, shadow fleets, intermediary channels, and sanction loopholes. The goal is clear: cut off Russia's ability to sell oil, import critical technology, and move money abroad. Each new round of sanctions makes it harder for Moscow to hide, harder for China to help, and harder for Russia to survive. The result? Rising costs, shrinking revenues, and growing isolation. So, where does this leave Beijing? Xi Jinping faces a dangerous choice. On one side, helping Putin could secure access to Russia's vast energy reserves. On the other, it risks catastrophic blowback from the West, tariffs, military pushback in Asia, and an economic showdown China doesn't want. Europe could align tariffs with the US, slashing Chinese exports. NATO could expand its presence in Asia. For Beijing, the price of saving Putin is simply too high. That's why China's banks are freezing deals. That's why even cautious lifelines are being cut. Xi knows Putin isn't worth the risk. Back in Russia, the ordinary citizen pays the price. Rising food prices, soaring rent, fuel hikes, and endless bills grind down daily life. Families postpone buying essentials, consumption collapses, and even modest household dreams vanish. The so-called war economy provides jobs, but without productivity. Factories churn out weapons instead of goods, leaving living standards to rot. Inflation remains high, purchasing power crumbles, and psychological exhaustion spreads across society. For ordinary Russians, the invisible war tax is everywhere, at the supermarket, at the gas pump, in the electric bill. The Kremlin can silence protests in the streets, but it cannot silence empty wallets at home. The harsh truth is this: Russia's economy doesn't just face a slowdown, it faces collapse. Without trust, without rule of law, property rights, or financial stability, no investor will commit, no bank will lend, and no economy can survive. Every sign points toward bankruptcy, not just in the courts, but in daily life. Factories closing, banks tightening, investors fleeing, and oligarchs shifting wealth abroad all scream the same thing. The system is unsustainable. The elites know it, the banks know it, even China knows it, and that's why Beijing is pulling back, refusing to mortgage its future for Putin's failing empire. In the end, Russia's crisis is more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's the unraveling of a nation's future. From labor shortages to collapsing oil revenues, from Chinese banks shutting doors to oligarchs fleeing, the message is clear: the Putin era is reaching its breaking point. And as China turns away, Russia is left more isolated than ever. Its economy strangled, its elites in panic, its people suffering. What began as a war to expand influence may end with Russia bankrupt, broken, and abandoned by its so-called friends. The real question now isn't whether Russia can survive this storm. It's how much longer the Kremlin can keep the illusion alive before the entire system implodes.